Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The head of Boeing prepares for a grilling by US lawmakers over safety problems and workforce culture.
Our other headlines: weaker than expected retail spending in the United States as consumers continue to wrestle with high prices. What will it all mean for the Fed's interest rate cuts?
The DPRK set to welcome Russia's President Vladimir Putin on a visit to boost trade and security.
And critical minerals and clean energy on their agenda on the final day of China's Premier's visit to Australia.
The head of Boeing is due to face tough questioning from US lawmakers in the coming hours on safety and working culture at the company. Shares in the plane maker have tumbled after a series of incidents, including a door blowing off an Alaska Airlines plane in mid-flight.
The CEO, Dave Calhoun, will testify before a Senate Investigations Committee.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. So, John, this looking like a difficult day for Boeing.
I think it's going to be very difficult indeed. I don't know what Dave Calhoun can honestly say to them, really, when it gets underway in a couple of hours' time. And things are getting worse for Boeing on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis. Now, I just want to make it very clear, I think Boeing will turn this around, okay? They will get it together, but it's not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen next year, probably not even over 5 years, but they will get there eventually. Now, the problem for Calhoun today is that only yesterday, Monday, another whistleblower came forward and alleged that he had evidence that Boeing has lost track of key parts and that he had evidence that faulty parts had been hidden from the regulators and that those faulty parts had ended up in aeroplanes that are now flying around the world. So that is the background for David Calhoun, CEO. He's the first executive from Boeing to appear on Capitol Hill since the Alaska Airlines door blowout of January of this year. That extraordinary situation. You know, on some aircraft, this was a 737 MAX 9, by the way. You know, on some aircraft, there's a window missing. When you get to your window seat, you find you haven't got a window. Well, it was one of those, and it blew out mid-flight because nobody had put 4 bolts in it, which is just an extraordinary thing. So Calhoun appears before a division of the Homeland Security at the Senate today on Capitol Hill. It's called the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation, and he will be grilled, okay? He is going to be bombarded, although ironically, I'm going to watch very closely to see if they give him as much as a hard time as they did the boss Xu Chu of TikTok when he appeared earlier this year. That will be very interesting to note, won't it? But anyway, when you appear before one of these committees, there's always a pre-statement that is put out, and Calhoun has done that. And in that pre-statement, he says, our culture is far from perfect. He says we're taking comprehensive action today to strengthen safety and quality. Well, that's all very well, but what does that mean? What can he actually say when he is picked apart by these senators later today? It'll be interesting to see how he responds. There's almost nothing that he can say. He's on a losing streak here. He's going to lose in the Senate this afternoon. I think he might hint at a successor. That might help a little bit, because David Calhoun has basically been forced out. Okay, his retirement has been, shall we say, brought up for fairly obvious reasons, and he'll be gone by the end of December. Now, finally, I know we have a guest coming up on this, but I just want to tell you what Wall Street thinks may help, and the guest can comment on this. Here, it is thought that maybe, just maybe, Boeing should be a little less aggressive with some of its suppliers, which are now dotted all over the country. That's something that they might do to improve their situation. Also, to improve the relations with the Federal Aviation Administration as well, which are at an all-time low. But most importantly, to keep control of these parts. If you're going to have suppliers all over the country, you've got to know where those parts are at any given moment and what's happening to them. And that's a thought about what Boeing might do to improve things from Wall Street. Now, at the moment, Boeing shares are down almost 3% this morning. They're down 31% year to date. Guys?
Well, John, we'll be back with you in just a moment for all the latest on US economic data. But for now, John Terrett in New York, thank you.
First, let's just get more on Boeing and a word with David Learmont, the aviation expert and consulting editor at the website Flight Global. David, welcome back. Good to see you. Let's just pick up on that point. I hope you were able to hear it from our correspondent John Terrett, Wall Street, suggesting that Boeing should be less aggressive and should get control of its suppliers. What do you think is the problem?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that John Terrett said. Yes, I did hear all he said. Calhoun is facing questioning. He's already had to admit that, as he put it himself, Boeing's culture at the moment is far from perfect. Well, he's got to say that because it's quite obvious that it's far from perfect. This started, at least it started showing, the problems started showing loud and clear in 2017 when an Indonesian airline, Boeing 737 MAX, crashed. And then a year later, in 2018, March 2018, another one crashed, and there were nearly 350 people who got killed on, those two airplanes. Now, nowadays, it's absolutely, it just didn't happen any longer that modern airplanes by Western manufacturers just had mistakes in them like that, because it was a piece of very, very bad design in which Boeing had broken all of its own rules with a piece of basically control software, which it hadn't even told the pilots of its airplanes about. And the pilots had got taken by surprise. So, look, if you've got that as a background, that's where you're coming from. Boeing has set a program for tidying its act up in all sorts of ways, but it's got a long way to go, as John Terrett correctly said.
How much trouble is the company in when it comes to rebuilding its reputation? I mean, it's simply too big to fail, isn't it?
I wouldn't say it's too big to fail, but I think it's basically, look, if you remember what Boeing used to be like, let's say 20 years ago, what we all thought of it, it was probably the primary aerospace engineering company in the world. It's got a serious competitor now in Airbus industry, or Airbus as it's now just called on its own. And Airbus is not having the same problems as Boeing. So one of the things which is a real problem for the Boeing brand is that it is not looking at all good against its main competitor. And it's got to do something about that. The whole world is watching. I mean, I know how good. I mean, I've been watching the industry for more than 40 years now. And I know how good Boeing has been. It can be that again. I think we all have faith that it probably will be. But it's got to get away from, I think, the problem that it has at the moment is it's got greedy, it's got over self-confident, it considers the shareholder dividends before anything else, and it's tried to cut corners to cut costs. They know they have to. Calhoun and his colleagues know that situation has to be reversed. They've started down that road, but they've got a long way to go.
Let's say you're appointed the CEO next month. How do you fix it? What do you do?
Well, first of all, you have to re-establish a proper relationship with your frontline employees. They're the people who are fitting parts to the airplanes, who are on the final assembly line. They've got to carry out quality control, not only in their own factories, their own final assembly lines, but they have a lot of suppliers, as John correctly said. They have a lot of suppliers. Those suppliers are supplying, equipment and components to Boeing specifications. Boeing has got to up the quality control at its suppliers. Boeing is ultimately responsible for quality control of everything that it receives. That is the culture that any large aerospace company should have in a totally safety-critical industry.
David, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on the programme. David Learmount, the aviation expert and consulting editor at Flight Global.
Now, the latest economic report from the United States is out, and it paints a fairly mixed picture. Let's go back now to our correspondent, John Terrett on Wall Street. So, John, talk us through the numbers.
Yes. Well, it was completely mixed this morning. I mean, we're in the middle of a shortened trading week because tomorrow, Wednesday, is the relatively new holiday of Juneteenth, which honors and is in memorial of the ending of slavery here in the United States. So we've only had yesterday, Monday, and today, Tuesday. Then we won't be back until Thursday and Friday. So you can't read a lot into a shortened week sometimes. But we were expecting retail sales to come out. They were published a couple of hours ago, and they came in much weaker than had been expected. Now, retail sales, of course, are part of the inflation story which is going on here. They barely advanced in the month of May. They were up by 0.1%. We were told they would be up by 0.2%. I think they were revised downwards in April as well, whereas in fact they were previously flat in April. So that is now begging questions about the strength of the consumer here. On the other hand, industrial production was published this morning, and it was up by 0.9%, almost 1%, and that is the largest jump in 10 months. So there's two very different tales. Once again, we come to the haves and the have-nots in this economy. You know, some people are doing really well, some sectors are doing really well, others seem to be struggling, and that's the story of today as well. It follows on from last weekend's publication of what really matters now, which is CPI and PPI. These are the key inflation figures. Last week they came in, both of them tamer than expected, particularly PPI, which is wholesale inflation. It all points to this economy slowing down. The question is how much? Now, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, in the form of its boss, Jerome Powell, last week in a news conference, after they left interest rates unchanged, hinted that there will be one interest rate cut before the end of the year, but he didn't rule out two either. That's the thing. So he basically said there'll be one, but he didn't rule out two. Most people think that the first one, if it comes, will be in September. However, Wall Street doesn't believe him. That's the thing. Wall Street is convinced that there will be three, that the economy is slowing more than the official figures tell us. So you put that all together, and the markets this morning are completely flat. The Dow is ahead by just over 0.1%, the Nasdaq by 1/5 of 1% lower, and the S&P 500 up by about the same amount. So we're back to where we were before we was, still waiting for more data to come in, and an economy that is roaring ahead when it comes to jobs, an economy that appears to be slowing now when it comes to the consumer, and a Federal Reserve that doesn't want to be late to the party. It wants to cut interest rates to avoid a slowdown or a recession maybe sometime next year, or at least to ease that if it happens. And a central bank that is split completely about when to do it. The chairman, Jerome Powell, we know is dovish. He wants to do it. We think he'll do it in September, but there are 7 people involved in this process who've been speaking this week, and their message is very mixed. Some of them dovish, most of them what they call hawkish, which means that they're prepared to keep interest rates stable or even raise them should that be necessary.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Terrett on Wall Street.
Inflation across the single currency Eurozone has risen for the first time this year, hitting 2.6% in May. Price rises have been slowing, prompting speculation over possible interest rate cuts, which some investors thought would come as early as next week. Economists had expected a smaller rise in inflation to 2.5%.
UK grocery inflation has eased for the 16th month in a row. Supermarket prices were 2.1% higher than a year ago in the month leading up to June the 9th. That's down from 2.4% the previous month. Despite the continued slowdown, industry data shows Britain's cut back on supermarket spending due to wet weather.
Hong Kong will keep its stock market open during typhoons and extreme weather. That's a change that it says will help maintain its global financial competitiveness. The new measure, which comes into effect from September, replaces a decades-long practice of stopping trading during seasonal severe weather.
Toyota shareholders have re-elected all 10 board members, including Chairman Akio Toyoda. That's despite them having presided over a scandal involving incorrect safety and performance tests. The company's president apologised to shareholders for what he called worries and troubles after the company was found to have submitted inappropriate data to authorities earlier this month.
Apple is shutting down its Apple Pay Later service less than a year after it launched in the United States. Customers were able to split purchases into 4 equal payments with no fees or interest. Instead, the tech giant will now allow users to apply for installment loans from banks and lenders when they buy their purchases through Apple Pay.
US electric car maker Fisker has filed for bankruptcy. The startup, founded by former Aston Martin design chief Henrik Fisker, had aimed to compete against Tesla with its Ocean SUV, but it failed to overcome supply chain issues, a tough funding environment and distribution hurdles that caused rapid cash burn. Competitive EV markets has seen several companies file for bankruptcy in the past 2 years.
China's top economic planner has committed to improve infrastructure and services for new energy vehicles.
Well, correspondent Li Jianhua is following the story. So, Jianhua, the development of China's EV industry has been singled out.
Yeah, right. So China's EV has been singled out as the EU's tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, electric vehicles, will kick in July the 4th, to be exact. And a wide range of topics have been touched upon, actually, in the NDRC presser. It is supposed to be quite domestic. The covered topics including large-scale equipment renewals, consumer goods tradings, EVs, and electricity usage in hot summer. But EV has got more attention, apparently, and the spokesperson of NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission, Li Chao, said the tariffs will undermine the EU's own low-carbon transformation and the global response to climate change. He added that Chinese consumer demand for new energy vehicles, namely hybrid cars and electric vehicles, is likely to maintain faster growth, and China will add more electric vehicle charging points and infrastructure. So if we look at the sales of EVs in China, actually, they are growing very fast. Production of new energy vehicles in China stood at 3.9 million units in May, increasing by 31% year-on-year, and the central government is rolling out more funds to encourage tradings of cars. Why EV? So as the property market becomes a drag on China's economy, as well as high local government debt and deflationary pressure, the country is looking to find alternatives, including EV.
Let's just park cars for a second and talk about shopping, because June the 18th marks one of China's huge annual online shopping festivals. How's this year looking? Everybody watches this, don't they?
Yeah, everyone is watching. And what is the 618? It is the 18th of June, and it is, let's say, it is Black Friday, but it is in June. Let's watch the history. It's very interesting. So in China, young people 10 years ago used to celebrate the Singles Day.
You're young.
Like me. Yeah, the 11th of November, it was like 1111. It was called Singles Day. Alibaba thought, okay, we could capitalize on the singles by having this online sales promotion. And then JD.com, that's the competitor of Alibaba, said, okay, that's a great idea. We should have something like this, quite similar. Well, we can't do it at the end of the year, so let's do it in mid-year. And that is the 18th of June. That is also the founding day of JD.com. And that is the origin of the 18th of June. And also we call it the 618 festival here. So it is all about business promotion. Let's say iPhone 15, I just checked it. It's now around $800 on JD.com. iPhone 15 with a capacity of 256 G. But here, do you know how much is it here in the UK on Amazon? It's $1,016. So it's $200 cheaper in China now, today. And what's special this year is it's longer. It started in May. It will end in June. And some of the online business owners, they are planning to extend their promotion sales to get more profit. And more trading orders this year, that is also quite special. They increased by around 710% year-on-year. And that is also part of the reason why China's retail sales in May increased big time.
Jianhua, thank you very much. Our correspondent Li Jianhua. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China and the European Union discussed climate cooperation amid tensions over electric vehicle tariffs.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation. I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Russian President Vladimir Putin is flying to the DPRK for a visit focused on trade and security. His trip will be closely watched internationally amid Western concerns over a closer alignment between the two countries.
In a DPRK newspaper article, Putin thanked Pyongyang for what he called unwavering support for Russia over the conflict in Ukraine. United States and South Korean officials have accused the DPRK of supplying weapons to Russia, something that both countries deny. Well, our correspondent Jack Barton reports now from Seoul.
It's Russian President Vladimir Putin's first trip to Pyongyang in 24 years, though he met with Kim Jong-un only last September, when the DPRK leader visited Russia's Far East. All of which has underscored the rapid growth of their relationship since the start of the conflict in Ukraine. Russia's state news agency says the leaders could sign documents leading to a strategic partnership treaty with economic and security implications. South Korean officials have already been on the phone to the Kremlin, making it clear a mutual defense agreement would be a red line for Seoul, though few analysts see a treaty going that far. On the economic front, DPRK state media is reporting that Russia has a plan to build a trade and settlement system with Pyongyang that could circumvent the sanctions both countries have been subjected to. Most analysts also expect Putin to raise the prospect of guest workers to ease serious labor shortages in Russia caused by the war in Ukraine. Seoul says the DPRK has supplied Russia with millions of artillery rounds as well as ballistic missiles, and in return for this, additional Russian assistance with its military satellite program is also likely to be discussed. US officials have said they are not concerned about this trip, but are concerned about the deepening levels of cooperation. Jack Barton, CGTN, Seoul.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova, who's in Moscow. So, Dasha, let's start with that newspaper article published in the DPRK. What did Putin say in it?
Well, the very strong messaging from Vladimir Putin's article, where he says that Moscow supports Pyongyang, and this is happening in the face of the pressure coming from the United States. So the understanding of this article is very clear. Moscow is going to support Pyongyang, while Pyongyang is also supporting Russia when it comes to counteracting what the countries say illegitimate U.S. sanctions, and Moscow saying that the deepening of the relationship between these two countries, the establishment of the mechanisms for trade and the settlements that are not controlled by the Western countries is also a response to this Western pressure and the attempts by the United States to impose the rules-based world order. Instead, Moscow says the deepening relationship between these two states will also be leading to a more fair international relations that are more stable. So the Russian president has taken the opportunity to criticize the Western countries, but also taking the note that Russia is abiding by the international sanctions regime that has been imposed against North Korea, while also noting that the U.S. impedes the mechanism of reviewing those sanctions and lifting them if the situation allows to do so. So the understanding is that the two countries are going to beef up cooperation and possibly sign the strategic partnership agreement during Vladimir Putin's trip to the DPRK.
So what would the DPRK be looking for from closer ties with Russia?
Well, certainly Moscow closely and very well understands the sanctions regime and says it is not going to interfere with that. But at the same time, if we look at the composition of Russian president's delegation, you can certainly see the ministers responsible for the areas such as space. Borisov, who is the head of Russia's space corporation, is part of this delegation. And during Kim Jong-un's trip to Russia's Far East last September, he visited Russia's Vostochny Cosmodrome. So many analysts are saying that the DPRK is really interested in Russia's satellite program as well as Russia's know-how in this area. But also the deepening of the relationship and envisages that the two countries will be looking into more logistics, into more transport corridors that will be required for tighter cooperation between the two in all areas. And the composition of the Russian delegation also refers to that. At the same time, we understand that the DPRK could also be looking into the tourism, the beefing up of tourism with Russians who have been cut off from their travels to the Western countries. That has diminished, and they are looking for new itineraries. And we also have heard that this year Russian tourists are now going back to return again to the travel to the DPRK that was halted because of the COVID. So a lot is on the agenda, and the DPRK is certainly looking into the issues that I have just mentioned, but also Russia says these issues will be helping the two nations to beef up their economic might.
Dasha, thank you very much. Our correspondent Dasha Chernysheva in Moscow.
China says relations with Australia have been further improved during Premier Li Qiang's visit.
The trip was focused on mineral investment, clean energy and business ties. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
After a brief welcome at a photo opportunity, Chinese Premier Li Qiang was given a tour of the Chinese-owned Tianqi Lithium's processing plant west of Perth. The lithium processed here is sent to China to make batteries for electric items. Experts say it's the kind of investment in Australia that China would like to increase so as to help meet the country's demand.
I think there are plenty of Chinese companies who would like to continue to invest in Australia's critical minerals industry. I say continue to because 5 or 10 years ago, they were already investing in Australia's critical mineral sector. And in fact, a lot of the capacity that Australia has now, both in mining and in processing, owes to Chinese investment.
It's no accident the Premier's Australian trip includes a stop here in Perth and more broadly Western Australia. 3/4 of all exports to China from Australia come from this state. That includes iron ore, which Western Australia has more of than anywhere in the world. Most of it is sent to China, where it's used to make steel. Premier Li also joined Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for a meeting with business leaders, including the heads of several Australian mining companies hoping to expand trade with China.
China and Australia have important positions in the industrial division of labour. Our close cooperation is important in maintaining the stability of the supply chain and injecting more drive into economic recovery.
The events held during the first official visit by a Chinese premier to Australia in 7 years showcased a renewed relationship between the two countries. From a commitment to loan 2 new pandas to the Adelaide Zoo,
and it is a symbol of goodwill, and we thank you,
to, more importantly, the resumption of high-level meetings.
Friends, the resumption of this round table is yet another encouraging sign of the stabilisation of the relationship between our two great nations. It reflects a commitment to dialogue that Australia and China can use to manage our different views and advance our common interests.
Both of our countries have explored areas such as technology and science. We should strengthen planning and strategic alignment and jointly cultivate potential growth points in our cooperation. I also hope our entrepreneurs could, from time to time, step out of business, promote exchange and communication between China and Australia in a broader sphere, and serve as a bridge to enhance our friendship and understanding.
Premier Li heads to Malaysia for the final stop in a three-nation tour. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Perth.
And Malaysia is preparing to join the BRICS group of emerging economies. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim made his comments in an interview with Chinese media outlet Guancha. BRICS was founded in 2006, originally comprised Brazil, Russia, India and China. Anwar's comments come ahead of Chinese Premier Li Chang's arrival in Malaysia for an official visit to mark 50 years of diplomatic ties.
China's Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang has been discussing cooperation on climate change with the European Commission Executive Vice President.
They're co-chairing an environmental dialogue in Brussels. Our correspondent Will Denslow reports.
Well, so far the two sides have had meetings looking at the domestic achievements of both sides, what they are doing when it comes to fighting the impacts of climate change on a global and regional level, as well as bilateral ties between the two sides. We heard from the Chinese delegation stressing their achievements on the domestic front, for example, stating that they plan to have the shortest span between seeing peak carbon levels to being carbon neutral. Of course, China has a plan to be carbon neutral by 2060. The two sides, during opening remarks at a roundtable, did stress some differences. The EU delegation saying there are areas where they don't see eye to eye. One key source of tension that was visible was the issue of the recent announcement that the EU is imposing some tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles. The EU delegation saying that they want a fair and level playing field. The Chinese delegation said that there was an example of protectionism and will hurt the green transition. However, the overarching message from those opening remarks from both sides was that cooperation is certainly achievable when it comes to the fight against climate change. The Chinese Vice Premier stating that the last dialogue between the two sides back last July showed that of all the efforts they sought to achieve, they had all been acted on. That showed that cooperation between the EU and China meant that could lead to tangible resolutions, tangible impacts in the future. When it comes to these tangibles going forward after this week's dialogue and this week of meetings, well, there are a few key issues that can be hammered out between the two sides. One is reducing plastic pollution. That a massive one, especially as we head towards this is UN General Assembly come September and COP28 later on in the year. Biodiversity loss, another key issue. The message from the European delegation is that when it comes to cooperation, green is the colour.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. At least 17 Palestinians killed in these latest Israeli strikes on Gaza as the United States expresses concern over tensions on the Israel-Lebanon border.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The head of Boeing is set to be grilled by US lawmakers over safety problems and workforce culture.
Our other headlines, the DPRK is set to welcome Russia's President Vladimir Putin on a visit to boost trade and security.
And critical minerals and clean energy on the agenda on the final day of China's Premier's visit to Australia.
At least 17 Palestinians have been killed in the latest Israeli strikes on the Nuseirat refugee camp in Gaza. The United States has warned against escalating tensions and called on both Hamas and Israel to agree to the ceasefire deal put forward by President Biden last month.
Israel is expanding its ground offensive in southern Gaza's Rafah and also exchanging cross-border fire along its northern frontier with Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon.
The situation is serious. We have seen an escalation over the last few weeks, and what President Biden wants to do is to avoid a further escalation to a greater war. That is the effort here. It will take everyone's interest in ending this conflict now, and we believe that there is a pathway diplomatically to do it, if the sides agree to it.
Our correspondent Jonathan Redjev reports now from Tel Aviv.
We just heard the U.S. envoy saying that despite the difficulties, there could be a diplomatic solution. And this is something that President Biden wants. We just heard the envoy say it. We also know that the governments in Israel and in Lebanon would like this solution. The only problem is that in Lebanon, the government is not really the one calling the shots. It is Hezbollah, which is much stronger than the government itself. Hezbollah is much stronger than the Lebanese army, and Hezbollah has its own interests. Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, and they many times dictate whatever Lebanon does. How much leverage does the United States have on Hezbollah? Clearly far less than it has on the Lebanese government. Therefore, despite all the efforts and despite all the leverage that the U.S. may have in Beirut, it may not have the leverage in Tehran, which eventually dictates what Hezbollah does on the border. And everything indicates that Hezbollah is on its independent path, apart from the Lebanese government. And as you mentioned, things are escalating on the northern border. At least for the moment, war seems practically imminent. This is part of a week of protest which was declared by the various protest groups. Yesterday we saw quite a big demonstration in Jerusalem outside the Prime Minister's residence. There's major anger on the government. It began before October 7th, before the war, as the government was trying to shift Israel into what the protesters call an undemocratic direction. That anger only grew bigger after the October 7th attack, and as it seems that no one in the government is taking any responsibility for it, not the Prime Minister, not the Defense Minister, not any of the other officials who headed the state when it went through what is probably its worst moment since the State of Israel was established. A lot of anger on the government, and we saw it once again being practically exploding in the streets of Jerusalem. Don't be surprised if we see more and more of that, and also here in Tel Aviv in the weekly Saturday night protests. Don't be surprised if we see this Saturday images that are far more violent than we saw in previous weeks.
From Gaza, our correspondent Akram Al-Sassari reports.
Over the last few hours, the number of Palestinians who have been killed because of the Israeli bombardment, be them aerial strikes or quadcopter strikes or just artillery fire or gunboat fire, have reached around 19 Palestinians. 9 of them were killed in Gaza central area. 2 of them were killed in Khan Yunis area, where an aerial strike took the life of at least 2 Palestinians. Around 5 of them were killed in Rafah, and the number is still increasing. The field hospitals around Rafah area have been receiving large number of Palestinians who are either killed or injured because of that ongoing fire exchange in Rafah area. The destruction of the residential blocks is still underway. Very large number of houses were destroyed. Some Palestinians were infiltrating into the area of Rafah and were taking some footage proving the situation of their homes and the situation of those of their dears and of their relatives, of their neighbors. The destruction that has been taking place is beyond imagination. As eyewitnesses have been saying, they have been circulating the footage of that, and they have been seeing of their dears who were killed. In the different hospitals, you see different families mourning their dears, and you can hear in the background the continuous bombardment in Rafah, in Khan Yunis, and in Gaza central area. Also, the news that are coming from the Gaza North and Gaza City are similar. Palestinians were killed in As-Sahaba market when they are just sitting there selling and buying stuff and communicating with each other. So the overall situation is still extremely catastrophic. The bombardment is still intensified, and the number of Palestinians killed and injured is still increasing. The number of houses destroyed because of the ongoing war is still increasing as well.
Ukraine's security service was reportedly behind a drone attack on an oil facility in Russia's border town of Azov. The strike caused several oil storage tanks to catch fire. Kyiv has pledged to continue the attacks on Russian energy facilities to try to hinder its military operation in Ukraine.
Outgoing Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte is closer to becoming the next NATO Secretary-General. His bid is now being backed by Hungary's Viktor Orban after Rutte agreed that Budapest would be allowed to opt out of plans to boost aid for Ukraine. Slovakia has also dropped its objections. That leaves Romania, whose president's also vying for the job, as the only country standing in the way.
At least 11 people have now died and more than 60 are missing after 2 migrant ships sank off Italy. A German aid group says it picked up survivors from a wooden boat before finding 10 bodies trapped in the lower deck. The boat is said to have set off from Libya. A second vessel, which launched from Turkey, caught fire and overturned, according to United Nations agencies.
Emergency services are battling several wildfires across the U.S. state of California. The fire north of Los Angeles has burned through more than 15,000 acres and forced more than 1,000 people to flee their homes since Saturday. In Northern California, strong winds are making it difficult to bring wildfires under control.
At least 9 people have been killed after heavy rain triggered landslides in southern China. The authorities say 15 others are still missing in Guangdong province. The floods have also knocked out power in villages and ruined crops. China's President Xi Jinping has urged all-out efforts for disaster relief.
Singapore is intensifying efforts to clean up a major oil spill on its coast.
The ship collision discharged around 400 tons of oil, and conservationists warn the slick could have long-term implications for marine life.
Our correspondent Patrick Falk reports.
At this popular beach club on Singapore's Sentosa Island, the umbrellas are going up. But it's hard to see many people coming to spend the day on these cabanas. Swimming and water sports are off limits for now. A thick stain creeps along the shoreline. The water's been painted black because of the spill.
We saw in the news what happened, which is a very unfortunate event. I mean, it's really unexpected, but the result is sad, and I think it will take a while before the cleanup is completed.
I myself want to come and volunteer. There are a lot of volunteers also who are coming and trying to help the government. I'm sure they'll fix it.
On Friday, a Netherlands-flagged dredger hit a bunker vessel moored in Singapore's shipping straits, puncturing its tank. About 400 tons of fuel leaked out. Authorities say oil from the vessel was treated with dispersants. Tidal currents caused it to spread along the city-state's shorelines. Hundreds of workers have been deployed to shovel away the blackened sand and bag up oil-coated remnants. There's a strong smell around here, much like that of a gas station. Some people living around the affected areas have reported feeling dizzy and unwell because of the fumes. About 1,500 meters of absorbent boom has been laid to limit any further spread. Authorities say more is being installed around designated areas. There are concerns about the impact on wildlife and nature. Conservationists are monitoring the extent of the damage.
Oil spills are generally probably the worst case scenario that we can face. The oil response team in Singapore acted fairly quickly, relatively, but whatever has spread out before they got to the scene that will have a direct impact on what we see here.
It's not clear how long it'll take to clean up the spill completely. Authorities say investigations are ongoing into what caused the collision. It comes amid severe port congestion at Singapore's container terminals as a result of ship diversions caused by the Red Sea crisis. Patrick Falk, CGTN, Singapore.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead.
I'll be reporting from Bedfordshire on aerial solutions, the growing interest in Chinese-made drones from British farmers.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. It's a tech conference which has landed a welcome $200 million in spending for Toronto, which is now hosting the event for the final time.
Collision brings together thousands of industry experts, startups and investors, and artificial intelligence is set to be the major talking point this year. Our correspondent Dan Williams reports.
More than 40,000 people from around 130 countries will be here in Toronto, called Silicon Valley of the North, for Collision, one of the world's largest tech conferences. The conference has been running here since 2019, but this year's event will be the final time it runs in Toronto.
Almost every talk around the entire 3 days will be about AI, Gen AI. Everything's about AI. I help write some of the scripts, so I know there's a lot of artificial intelligence talk. A lot of these AI startups, they're raising billions of dollars, right? But at the same time, Geoffrey Hinton is telling us, are we able to control this? That this thing is exponentially faster than he even expected. So I feel like what's going to happen in the next few years is going to be a big change. The big talk right now in like Silicon Valley is about how the one-person billion-dollar company is coming, assisted by AI. This is something that is changing the world. Also, you know, before you have to hire all these programmers to make a website or an app, now AI and low-code, no-code software platforms are helping everybody to create their own startup, which is very exciting, I think.
Tell me, what can we expect from the Web Summit once this closes down, with all roads then lead to Vancouver?
Vancouver. So I was born and raised in Vancouver, so I'm very excited that we have the show in Vancouver. But you know, there's a different vibe between Toronto, East Coast, and West Coast, right? Vancouver is very well known for video games, AR, VR, special effects. Its proximity to Silicon Valley, its proximity obviously to Asia. I feel like it'll be a hot spot. Space and a whole different lot of new kind of technologies will be the focus of that show.
And we will be here all week bringing you highlights from the conference as well as exclusive interviews with key speakers. Dan Williams, CGTN, Toronto, Canada.
Over the past 2 years, artificial intelligence has consumed the tech sector, reinvigorating hubs like Silicon Valley after post-COVID cutbacks.
Our correspondent Mark New looks at some of the latest gadgetry being developed by smaller companies.
The Silicon Valley startup Vimers has launched a new AI-powered editor, which can turn ordinary photos into animated 3D immersive videos. What used to take graphic designers hours to do now just takes a few clicks.
Photos are great, but it's kind of also limited with the outrage.
So imagine what will happen if you are like shopping online, and then like you can turn all of this like more dynamic. Or you actually go to like dine in a restaurant and you check the menu, and the menu all like popping up like in 3D or like moving in AI, right? It's kind of like more kind of engaging, more connecting with the customers.
We asked Salahia how powerful generative AI tools like these will impact jobs.
This is like a more as a win as opposed to like taking people's job. So if you are like a graphic designer, this is like will enable you to take like far more like volumes and serve like more customers.
Shanghai and Silicon Valley headquartered Acool is pushing the bounds of generative AI with a technology that face swaps with incredible realism. In India, its tech was behind a social media advertising campaign that allowed anyone to upload a selfie, which was used to put them in a personalized commercial with Bollywood superstar Shah Rukh Khan.
It's mainly about making the user experience it themselves, like creating their own versions, their own copies. We work with model agency companies, and these allow the models don't need to go to the actual shooting site.
Other startups are focused on leveraging the power of generative AI chatbot ChatGPT. While ChatGPT has a vast general knowledge because it can scrape the internet for data, it doesn't know much about companies, which obviously keep their data private.
Era is a personal executive assistant that can connect with all your company's workplace browsers and apps so it knows everything that's happened within them. It can remind you of meetings, cancel and reschedule meetings while checking your colleagues' schedules, or simply attend the meeting for you and provide highlights.
With Era, she's tireless. It's software. Very quickly, we are able to kind of do this for you. And these are just simple examples of all the other repetitive things that humans don't like to do.
But Era goes a step further by being able to take queries about your business and provide insight.
You basically get a business analyst in your pocket with AI. You can send a PDF document, a spreadsheet, anything in the workplace to AI and say, what was the best quarter last year? Boom, third quarter did really well, fourth one was maybe slow because of Christmas and those kinds of things. And the capabilities just keep getting better.
So from analysis to advertising to marketing, startups are harnessing the power of AI in hopes of generating greater insight, engagement, and profits. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
Now it's farming, but not as you know it. This is agriculture from the air. And a Chinese manufacturer says it's ready to help the British government meet targets for drones.
Westminster has identified the sector as one it wants to encourage, with grants now available for farmers to take up the technology.
Our correspondent Catherine Drew reports.
Taking off. XAG drones on display at Cereals, the annual show dedicated to crop farming. The Guangzhou-based company has spent 3 years trying to break into the market, knowing a welcome by UK authorities would help ease their entry into Western Europe.
UK market for us is very important because it's not only for the UK but also for the whole Europe, because for the neighboring countries, actually they keep a close eye on the development in British markets, and not only for the regulations but also for other scenarios.
After a report showed the wider use of drones could contribute $55 billion to the economy by 2030, while cutting 2.4 million tonnes of carbon emissions and creating 650,000 new jobs, the British government has got behind them.
Behind me you can see traditional sprayers, and they're large and extremely heavy on the soil. And it's these that the British government are trying to replace with drones. They want to get over 180,000 into the air by the end of the decade.
Farmers can now apply for a 60% grant towards the cost of agricultural drones, while UK regulators have also cleared the spraying of a commonly used pesticide, slug pellets. Other chemical permissions are expected to follow. XAG's UK partner says months of wet weather has also prompted British farmers to look to drones.
They can lose their entire crop to slugs because they can't get on to treat them at the right time. And it is about doing it at the right time. Slugs come out when it's wet. Tractors can't go in the field when it's wet. So the farmer is desperately waiting for it to get dry enough that he can get on with his tractor while watching the slugs eat all of his fresh emerging crop.
The changes and incentives are leading to a growing number of people investing in drones to offer Uber-style services in painting, seeding and now spraying chemicals.
The business with the drones is absolutely new in the UK, and farmers didn't use the drones previously for the fields or for the greenhouses cleaning. So we're learning about the industry. We are helping guys to form the market.
XAG is not the only tech company looking to revolutionize traditional farming practices, with robots an increasingly common sight.
If we target pesticides apply them in a more targeted way, we're going to dramatically reduce usage. We're going to reduce our carbon footprint. You know, if we can do it through, electrically driven drones, it's going to change everything. Farmers are still sort of cautious, but they're great takers up of technology when they need to.
Costing around $50,000, 6 XAG drones were sold in the UK last year. That number has jumped to 12 this month. Having cleared regulatory hurdles to fly and now spray chemicals, the Guangzhou-based company says it hopes to replicate the success it's seen in Asia, in Western Europe. Catherine Drew, CGTN, Bedfordshire.
The headlines again. The boss of Boeing prepares for a grilling by United States lawmakers over safety problems and workforce culture.
The DPRK prepares to welcome Russia's President Vladimir Putin on a visit to boost trade and security.
And critical minerals and clean energy on the agenda on the final day of China's Premier's visit to Australia.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place, from all of the team in London. It's goodbye.
Goodbye.